picture this. A small, pretty new church in the ancient city of Colossae. Things are going well, but there's a problem. A new, dangerous idea is starting to spread, and it threatens to tear down everything they believe. So, the Apostle Paul, who's in prison at the time, hears about this. And what does he do? He doesn't just write a warning letter. He writes a poem, a hymn, actually.
So what was this dangerous idea? Well, it was a teaching that basically downplayed who Jesus Christ really was. And Paul's response, it was brilliant. He writes what we now call the Christ hymn. It's this powerful, poetic masterpiece designed not just to fix a wrong idea, but to completely blow their minds about who Jesus is and everything he's done for them.
But before Paul even drops this epic hymn, he needs to set the stage. He starts by reminding the Colossians about this huge spiritual change they've already gone through, a total transfer from one reality to a completely different one. So here's how Paul breaks down their story. On one side, you've got the domain of darkness. Think of this as a state of corruption, of being spiritually in debt. But on the other side, there's the kingdom of light, a reality of redemption and total forgiveness. Now, the crucial part here, and you've got to get this, is that this wasn't something they earned. Nope. It's something that was done for them. They were literally rescued from one kingdom and moved into the other. To make this whole idea of redemption really hit home, think about it like this. Imagine a beautiful, priceless wedding ring. It gets lost, ends up in a junkyard, and it gets all rusty and gross. Well, redemption is the act of someone finding that ring, carefully cleaning off all the gunk, and restoring it to its original, beautiful shine. That, Paul is saying, is exactly what God did for them. He pulled them out of that corrupted state and made them new. Okay, so with that foundation in place, Paul finally unleashes the Christ hymn. And honestly, you can think of it as the ultimate job description, a definitive, powerful statement that's meant to leave zero doubt about who Jesus is and why he has all the authority. The very first title he gives Jesus is just wow. He calls him the image of the invisible God. Now, this isn't just saying Jesus is kinda like God. No, the point is way bigger. Paul's arguing that if you want to see what the unseen, invisible God is really like, you look at Jesus. He is the perfect physical representation of the Father, full stop. And he keeps building on that. Next up, Paul says Jesus is the creator of all things. This gets right to the heart of the problem in Colossae. Jesus isn't just the first or the best part of creation. He's the very agent through whom all of creation, everything in heaven and on earth, everything you can see and can't see, was made.
And then he drops the mic. Paul writes that in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. I mean, come on. He's saying that every single thing that makes God, God, lives completely and fully inside the person of Jesus Christ. There's just no wiggle room there.
But here's the twist. Right in the middle of this beautiful, powerful hymn, there was a single phrase that would light a match and start a fire of controversy. A debate so intense it would literally split the church and take centuries to figure out. He is the firstborn of all creation. Now, to you and me, that might not sound so explosive. But in the early church, oh man, this one phrase became a theological war zone. Was Paul saying Jesus was a created being, or was he saying something else entirely? So let's jump forward to the 4th century. A guy named Arius, a really popular and charismatic preacher, gets a hold of this verse. And for him, firstborn of all creation meant exactly what it sounded like. Jesus was the very first thing God ever created. Sure, he was the highest, the most glorious being, but he was still created. And that meant he wasn't God himself. And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. On one side, you have Arius's view, Christ was created. On the other side, you have what would become the official church position, Christ is God, co-eternal with the Father, not created at all. And this was no small disagreement. This debate cut right to the very heart of what Christianity was all about. This argument got so big, so heated, and so divisive that the Roman emperor himself, Constantine, had to step in. He called together the famous Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. He brought church leaders from all over the empire to finally settle this question once and for all, a question sparked, in part, by this one little line from Paul's poem. So how do we solve this puzzle? To get what Paul meant, we have to understand what that word firstborn actually meant in his world. And trust me, it's not as simple as it sounds. And here we go. This is the aha moment. The Greek word Paul used is prototokos.
Now, while it could mean the first to be born, it was very often used as a title signifying supreme rank, preeminence, and ultimate authority. Think of it like a king calling his heir the firstborn to show he has supreme authority. Even if he wasn't technically the oldest son, it was about status, not about origin. And the text itself totally proves this out. Paul says Jesus is firstborn because all things were created by him. See, he's linking the title directly to his role as creator. He has primacy over creation, not a place in it. And later, Paul calls him the firstborn from the dead, which means he has supreme rank and power over death itself. The context makes it crystal clear. Firstborn means preeminent, number one, the boss. Now, what's so amazing is that this deep dive into theology wasn't just some intellectual game for Paul. It was super practical. By defining Christ's story, he was actually reminding the Colossians of their own story. Paul basically maps out their spiritual journey. He's like, look at your past. You guys were alienated from God, even hostile. But check out your present. Because of this all-powerful Christ, you are now reconciled. You're holy. So what about your future? Your goal now is to be stable and steadfast, totally rooted in this truth. And here's the bottom line for Paul. Having a correct, high view of who Jesus is, well, it's not just about being right. It's the anchor for your entire life. It's the very thing that makes you stable and steadfast. It's what keeps you from getting pushed around by every new, shiny, and dangerous idea that comes your way. And that leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on. Paul's whole argument is built on this one powerful idea, that what you believe about the identity of Jesus will fundamentally determine the stability and the direction of your entire life. So the question for us, 2,000 years down the road, is pretty simple. Is that still true today?